Want to live longer and better? I'm Dr. Jess. I'm a physical therapist, and in this podcast, I bring you real, science-backed strategies from physical health providers, mental health providers, and nutrition experts, so you can build strength, protect your mind, and fuel your body for decades to come. Longevity starts here. If you want to move like you're 30 when you're 70, start with your hips. They dictate how well you walk, balance, lift, and age. Today, that's what we're talking about, is the true gatekeeper to lifelong mobility. So John, what do you know about the hip joint?
I know that we use them every day.
Absolutely.
And I know that they're very important. But tell me more.
So I love assessing the hip, working with the hips, because it's a huge part of treatment as an orthopedic therapist, because they will dictate how well your back feels, how well your SI joint feels, which is where your pelvis comes together. The hip itself, knees, they're huge for how your posture is, how well you move, how well you walk, how well you balance, how well you transfer. They are pivotal. And so it is a joint in the body, the hip. So it's where the femur, or the long bone in your leg, articulates or comes together with the pelvis. So I'm showing, for those of you that are watching, I'm showing on the video here, the hip joint itself. And so the key for this is that this is the largest weight-bearing joint in the body. So what it needs to do is it needs to distribute force up through the spine, and it's going to help with pelvic stability. So one of the things that happens that is so common as we age is that we start losing hip mobility, specifically extension. And the reason why is that so many of us sit for our jobs. And so when we sit and we drive and we eat dinner and we sit and watch a show at the end of the day, our hip is in 90 degrees of flexion. Okay. So the muscle here on the front of the hip is called your iliopsoas, and it's in a shortened position for a large portion of the day for many individuals. So now when we want to stand up, that's a 90-degree change just to be able to stand up straight. When we walk, the hip is supposed to be part of what propels us forward. So our hip should actually go into extension when we walk. That's us using the huge muscles on the back of our hip, our glutes, to help propel us forward. But when our hip starts getting tight because it's in 90 degrees of flexion for such a long period of time, and if we don't actively work on stretching to maintain clean hip extension, then what happens is when we walk, the hip stops extending. So when it stops extending, our gait speed decreases. We start getting a little bit shorter with the stride. All of these changes are very slow typically. It's a really, really slow onset. And so when this starts happening, now the load that comes into the spine that the hip extension should be helping with starts getting translated up through the SI joint and then into the low back. So this is huge for why so many people get back pain and SI joint pain. And it's also just part of why walking becomes a little bit slower. Like you feel like you're not as reactive. If you wanted to take off and just go into a run, which you need even more hip extension to run, it's like, oh, I haven't been able to do that for years. And a lot of it comes into is the hip doing what it's supposed to do so that you can move how you want to move. And so a big predictor of, lifelong health is hip extension. So is that moving? Because if it's not, we know your gait pattern or your walking pattern will decline. And we know you need to keep walking in order to stay healthy. And if the hip isn't moving well, the stabilizers here, the deep stabilizers in the hip, are a huge part of our balance. So that's part of when we stand on one leg, it's the hip muscles that keep us balanced over that leg. There's other muscles in the foot and ankle as well, but this is huge for single leg standing. And that's another predictor of fall risk is, can you stand on one leg and not fall over? And so with the hip being central to balance, walking, and upright posture, when it gets stiff, it does cause you to decline faster than you really need to. Honest answer. So is that something so we're going to clip this part because it's just getting a little bit, not conversational. So we'll clip this out. I want to do this so you'll see it on the screen. So John, when you go to the gym, do you see anybody specifically trying to stretch hip extension?
Not normally.
Right. It's not like a thing that we're like, oh, hey, I need to make sure that I keep my hip extending so that I have good longevity in life and that I keep my back nice and healthy and my pelvis nice and healthy. It's one of those things that is just not commonly talked about, in my world, in the therapeutic world, it's huge and it's really, really important, but it just hasn't really made its way into common knowledge for living that active lifestyle. So one of the things that is good to be able to test. So a lot of times people are like, well, how do I know? Like, how do I know if my hip extends or not? And so there's a simple test that you can do where you lie on your back and then you're on a elevated surface. It could be a bed, it could be a massage table, something like that, like kind of high off the ground. And what you want to do is be diagonal on there so that your hips are pretty close to the edge of the surface, but your shoulders are really solid on the surface. Then you bring one leg up and you hold it with your hands. So you hold one leg and then you let the other leg drop off the surface and see, does that create back pain? Does it feel like the femur, that long bone in your thigh, will drop down by itself? Or does it just kind of hang out here and not do anything? So gravity should be helping that leg just kind of fall. You should fall into at least 20 degrees of hip extension, if not more. So, and then you would reverse that for the other side. The reason why I say lie diagonal on the surface is because if you're all the way at the edge and then you drop that, you could roll yourself off. So
Right.
don't do that. So that's called the Thomas test. And so that's one way. It's a pretty easy test that you can do on your own to see if your hips extend. The other thing that it could be helpful is just seeing, can you stand on one leg, right? Just kind of time it. So stand on one leg and then compare that to the other leg, because it is common that we'll have one hip that's a little bit more affected than the other. The reason why is that we're going to have different asymmetries. We have a tendency to sit with our legs crossed, one leg habitually over the other leg. Or when we sleep, we habitually sleep more on one side than another, or just things like that, just patterns that develop. And with those, we'll start to see just asymmetries in mobility. It could be an injury that happened. Maybe one ankle is really stiff. And so because that ankle is stiff, you've shortened your stride on that side. And now that means your hip extension is shortened because the ankle won't move. And so all of that is quite common and can be improved because we just want to maintain normal as much as possible. So as long as we're like understanding what do I want to know, which is, does my hip extend? Rotation is also important in the hip. That's huge for like maintaining stability in the pelvis and the pelvic floor, right? Because it's the pelvic floor muscles that are part of your hip rotators. And so when hip rotation gets weak and the pelvic floor is weak, which is, it can happen after pregnancies, it can just happen over time with just, as we age, there's just a little bit that pressure of gravity is pushing down on the pelvic floor. And then the muscles can just atrophy over time, and it can create, essentially, the pelvis can start to get a little bit unstable, meaning you would get pain typically on one side of the low back, but below the belt line. That's like very common SI joint pain versus central in the spine, which would be probably more indicative of like a lumbar spine issue versus an SI joint issue, SI sacroiliac joint, where the pelvis and the tailbone come together. So as muscles don't stabilize, as well, just like any postural muscle, then, you'll start to see breakdowns, stress on ligaments, aches and pains. And then with that becomes the mobility declines, and when mobility declines, then we're not leading that active lifestyle,
Right.
because we know the best thing that we can do to have lifespan is cardiovascular exercise, walking, running, biking, anything where you keep that heart rate elevated for an extended period, and then staying strong. And so as we get stiff and things ache, we're just more likely to not participate because it feels like it'll hurt. And then we start to see that progressive decline. I mean, we see it in the clinic all the time, right, John?
Oh, yeah, every day.
Yeah.
Every single day.
Yeah.
So we talked about the Thomas test, and what are some tangible ways that we can exercise our hips and make sure that we're stretching them? Like, give me some stretches and exercises that I can do, every day or every other day to kind of keep my hips where they need to be.
Yeah, so that's like super proactive. So I there's a couple different ways that you can stretch your hips. That test that I showed you, that's called the Thomas test. You can stretch that way too. You just lie in your bed, kind of angle yourself so that your upper body is really, really solid. You bring one leg up, hold that leg with your hands, So that way, that just protects your low back so your low back doesn't arch too much. And then you just drop one leg off the edge and you let it stretch 30 seconds to a minute and then repeat it on the other side. The other way that you can stretch your hips is you can do a lunge stretch. So we think of a lunge stretch where you put like 1 foot back, 1 foot forward. We think of that as stretching the ankle, which it does. But if you pull in that belly button and squeeze your glute to make sure that you're extending the hip, that's a great way to get, I call them twofers, the little twofer ones. And so now I'm stretching the hip into extension and I'm stretching the calf muscles on the back of my ankle. So that's an easy one. Anytime we stretch, we want to hold it for a duration. So at least 30 seconds, if not a full minute, and then repeat on the other side. And then another easy one, if you want to add the quad to it. So this is kind of my favorite one that I like doing is I go into a half kneel position. So I've got 1 foot up that's kind of holding me. So I'm balanced. And then I've got one knee down. And then I hold either the back of my ankle or use a strap. And so now I can, essentially really stretch my quad, which is on the front of my leg, and I can stretch my hip flexors at the same time. So this one's like, if you have the mobility to be able to go into the stretch, this is great because the quad getting tight is also part of what'll start pulling you forward, which kind of gets us into that forward posture, and then the head comes forward and we get neck pain and all sorts of headaches and things like that happen when we start pulling forward. So we've really got to keep ourselves nice and open because in life when we function forward. We drive and our arms are forward. We type, our arms are forward. We hold a phone, our arm is forward. Like rarely in our daily function do we open up and like really stretch, open up the front of our body, open up the front of our hips, open up the front of our legs. It's just, if you want to keep it, you really gotta do something intentionally to keep it. So the half kneel quad stretch where you are intentional about getting the hip to extend is my favorite, but doing the standing lunge stretch or the Thomas stretch are also great ways to keep the mobility for the hip. Now, strength is different, right? So just because it moves doesn't mean it's strong. So it's always both. So to
Right.
keep it strong, that's where we want to make sure that we're using all of the muscles around the hip. So doing bridging is great because that's using the glute max. But if we're not also using the muscles on the outside of the hips, so the abductors, those ones are going to be the big ones for balance. So that's where you would put like a band around your knees, and then you would bridge, push out against the band, and then lower back down. So you can do that as a double leg bridge. You can do it as a single leg bridge. And same thing with like your hip rotators. You can put a band around both ankles and then kind of push just the ankles away and get those hips to rotate. So there's great ways to be able to keep the hips strong, but you really have got to make sure that you're using the abductors as well. And I don't love the machine at the gym, the abductor machine where you're seated and then you push your legs apart, right? So that is technically abduction, but look, the hip is flexed. It's flexed when you're in that. And when we function and we stand and we balance, our hip is extended. So I really like making sure. So if we bridge and we lift the pelvis off the table, now my hip is in at least neutral, which is more like when I'm standing. And then I
Mhm.
push my knees apart against the band. So that's going to have a more direct correlation to helping us with balance and ensuring that we're actually using the glutes so we're not compensating with some of the muscles in the front of the hip, which is what I typically will see when someone's like, "Oh yeah, I do a bunch of work to keep my hip strong," but then I test the strength and I put their hip into extension and I push and it like falls. I'm like, "Okay, well just show me what you're doing," and it's everything is flexed. They're seated, everything is in a flex position. So it's like, okay, you're on the right path with strengthening. We just got to change how you're doing it. We got to get that hip extended and then load. So bridging, I love bridging. I love putting a ball underneath somebody, holding a bridge, and doing hamstring curls, like doing a bunch of things where we have that hip nice and straight or extended. So, and then, also just functionally is like doing mobility work. So, doing footwork type things where you are kind of challenging your ability to move kind of quickly. So, it might be something where you're putting 1 foot up onto the Bosu and you're slipping off and on, nice and quick but controlled into a lateral lunge. So, I'm having to like lower with that hip hinge and come right back off, lower with that hip hinge and come right back off. And so anything where I have a little bit of speed too is going to keep that reactivity nice and strong. Or like standing on the Bosu and doing some squats, right? I'm going to have to be using my hips to stabilize, but that's like going to be a quicker type of motion. It's the results that we get from how we strengthen depends on how we strengthen. So if we strengthen with big, controlled, forceful movements, that's great for power. If we strengthen and we've got these little small corrections going on, that's great for stability and reactivity. So the big story is we kind of want all of it. We want to stretch, we want power, and we want stability so that we stay reactive. And that reactivity is balance. If something happens and you can react quickly, because it will, something will happen, right? Like the
Sure.
other day, I'm walking through the house and someone had spilled water. My foot steps on it. And I mean, luckily, I was reactive and I was able to catch my leg and I brought it back and was like, what just happened? And I was like, bit it. But that reactivity saved me from hitting the ground, potentially tearing something. Who knows, right?
Right.
So that is it will happen. Like that's everyday life. Things are going to pop up that you're not expecting and that you can't pre-prepare a motor pattern for.
Well,
So
absolutely.
yeah. So big picture is there's plenty that we can do proactively, right? So like John, what's your like kind of weekly balance with movement? Like how do you kind of stagger it right now?
I mean, I try to work a lot standing up. I've got a standing desk just to kind of keep my hips straight.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's huge.
Yeah,
Ergonomics at the workstation.
absolutely. Because I
Yeah.
mean, we live in a world where everybody has an office job and they sit in a cubicle and they sit at 90 degrees all day long. So, standing desks are great. I
Mm-hmm.
use mine every day. I just lift it up when I'm ready to stand up and put it back down when I'm ready to sit.
Absolutely. Another thing that I really love for people who can, if it works for your workstation and all of that, is those walking mats, like the
Hmm.
treadmill things for the desk.
Yeah, the walking
Because
pads.
now the walking pad, that's what it's called. Because now as you're walking, your hip is actually going through gentle motion of flexion and extension. So it's
Mm,
great for the synovial fluid around the hip. It's also good just loading, for the joints themselves. You get this pistoning effect, which is great for the synovial fluid around your joints.
hmm.
And you're not, everybody kind of gets this a little bit confused. They think they have to walk fast enough to make it a cardiovascular workout so that you're kind of out of breath. That this is not that.
Right.
So a walking pad is just, it's very slow. So visually, you should still be like you should be able to still read the screen on your computer. You can answer a phone call and not sound out of breath. It's like you don't have to make this like an exercise treadmill time. It's
Right.
below that, you know. And then I've had a number of people that are like, I can't type and use that at the same time. Like, what speed are you on?
Right.
So just slow the speed. Like, yep, that's all it is. Slow it down, but you'll get all the benefits of the joint health. It's just you're not getting the cardiovascular benefits,
Right.
So, but you can be productive. So you're not changing any of your productivity time, which is so important. So
Right.
now you might be somebody that can take a meeting. I mean, I take meetings while I run. I mean, that's just is what it is. Like you're going to hear me running. John is very well aware of this. Um,
Yes. I
like
normally
it,
don't know you're running until I hear the wind.
yeah, exactly. And then it's like, you're like, where? I'm like, yeah, I'm going over the bridge. It'll be quiet soon. I promise. Like I'm
Right.
gonna make my turn and then it'll be quiet.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And like sometimes like you just if you're gonna fit it all in, you just gotta be productive while you exercise, and sometimes that's how I have to do it. And just thinking about hips and stuff like that. Like if you are at work and like you can have a higher heart rate and take a meeting and it doesn't affect your workflow, then you can get your
Right.
30 minutes of cardio in during your workday, which is like amazing. Like
Oh, yeah,
talk about
absolutely.
efficiency. I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's like my it's like one of my favorite things that like has like come onto the market are these walking pads. I love them. My husband has one at home. He's got a standing desk. It's because he does work at a desk, right? My job, I'm in patient care. I can't really walk on a walking pad. It doesn't work for me,
Right.
and that's okay. Yeah. Okay. So in your day, obviously you've got the standing desk. Right now, the walking pad's been a little bit hard in the clinic, just with like trying to, because you're all over the clinic all the time. Like to
Right.
stop it, get off, answer the phone, go do this, go get a patient, get this. I mean, it's yeah,
Right.
feasibly it's been a little bit tough. But what are other like things that where you've been, just I just added a little bit more specificity to, like, for example, gym versus no gym, walking versus biking, like what's been working for you?
So I use our gym in the clinic and work out, in between patients sometimes. And I use our app that we have that's got all of these mobility workouts and functional fitness workouts that, really don't just target one thing, but target a group that allow me to step away from my desk and, just go right over into the gym and do what I need to do. And then I can come right back.
Yeah. Which for me, I find it, I can get a lot more done faster when I combine muscle groups. And so
Hmm.
I don't go to a gym anymore. I think there's a lot of people that enjoy gyms and they like machines, and that's fine. Like I know you used to be a gym person. It's just when you're working that one muscle group at a time, by the time you get like whole body strengthening, it takes a long time.
It
And
does.
I don't have that much time, so I like
Well, and I mean, if
combining.
you think about it, like when you're in a gym, it takes you an hour to do, these 10 things. Whereas if you, do them functionally, it takes you 10 or 15 minutes and you work out the exact same muscle groups.
Mhm.
I would
Because
much
you're
rather spend 10 or
combining.
15 minutes, right,
Right. Right.
than the hour that I already don't have in my day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just like once you add kids into the equation and work, it's like, it's so hard. It's so hard to like, where is this hour going to come from? Because like in a gym, it's, when your kid's little, you can't just be like, okay,
Right.
don't touch anything,
Right.
like it's
Yeah.
gotta,
No, that doesn't
like,
work for toddlers.
right. But you got to pick them up,
No.
right? Because it's like they can't
Right.
just stay at the daycare extended day or whatever it is. And
Right.
so it's like, now how do you find the balance to keep you healthy and, make sure that you're taking care of all of your responsibilities? And so, for me, whether it's in the gym here or at home, I've got free weights, BOSU, kettlebell, just a handful of things, and then I can do so many different exercises. And it's in the backyard. Kids can run around and play. They come and join me a little bit, then they go play. They come join me a little bit. They go play.
Well,
Um,
and I think that's the other important thing. So when you do, the functional side of it, where you're working out multiple groups at the same time, and you're doing it at home or in a private environment, and you don't have all of those machines, it's more of an opportunity to get your kids involved in it.
right. Yeah.
I mean, when I'm here and my daughter comes with me and we work out in the gym, she loves it. I
Oh, yeah.
mean, but I can't take her to an actual gym. Like
Right.
the machines are ridiculous. There's too many people. But like when I'm doing the functional side of it outside of a gym environment, a corporate gym environment,
Right.
it allows that cohesiveness of bringing her in and
Yeah.
letting her work on it as well.
And that's part of our value system, right? So is that we're now allowing the people around us to be part of our value system, which is keeping our bodies healthy and strong and mobile. And instead of saying like to your kids, like, you should do this, you're saying, hey, do you want to join me? Right.
Right.
So, and it just becomes part of how they think, so it's like both of my boys now, I've got, one that's got autism. But you should see him. He stands on the bosu. He does his squats. He's got his weights. Like he does
Oh
all of
yeah.
it. I mean, at school they're like, does he do parkour? Because he is like really. You should see how in the OT room how he vaults and climbs over things. His balance is insanely good. I was like, well, you should see our backyard.
Right. Right.
His brother does parkour and works out with me, and our youngest also does all of that balance, agility, everything that's available to him. He just uses it because he doesn't know any different. And
Right.
because of that, he's got really great coordination. Like he's like better than us on a bunch of these things that we ask for
Oh
challenging.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
other
yeah.
things are a struggle for him, but like that's just kind of how we've always lived. And so it's like he has no problem picking it up. And I mean, his squat form is impeccable. I mean, it's beautiful. Like, I love it. I have no correction there. But that is part of the value system is teaching the next generation, what they can do proactively so they lead a less reactive lifestyle is the goal.
Right.
And then we ourselves ideally are leading a less reactive lifestyle and a more proactive lifestyle. So then we just don't get clobbered down with the things that can slow us down. You know, like we don't have to be in our 70s and 80s and immobile and on canes and walkers and not able to travel to Europe or take that cruise or whatever it is. Like it, unless there is something that is really happening and getting in the way, so much of that is just increasing the amount of mobility work, stability work, and then some of the endurance training. And so if the hips are stiff, it's gonna be an uphill battle. It just
Yep.
is. And
Oh yeah.
so if we can just address one thing and open up hip extension, it's amazing how like all of a sudden walking is easier, balancing is easier, the strengthening is easier. Like you don't feel the pain in your back. And it's like, oh, well now I'm not so afraid of movement because it doesn't hurt. I'm like, look at that. Isn't that fun? It's so much more fun this way.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, moral of the story is if you want to stay moving for a long period of time and moving at that high level, you got to keep the hips moving. So, keep them, you've got to stretch them. You've got to move. You got to get up out of a seated position. If you can't get a standing desk or a walking pad, that's okay. Just stand up. Take a break and stand up, and then put time in your day where you are more specifically you're trying to have that dedicated time to stretch and the dedicated time to strengthen. And it doesn't have to be hours, honestly. Like if you take 10 minutes and just really work on some stretching and at least 15 minutes to really work on some whole body strengthening, that would be a great starting point for being able to move better. And then if something is actually hurting, like for real, it's actually hurting and it's not getting better and you're doing some stuff at home, ask for help. That's totally fine. Ask to see a physical therapist, see if they can help you with like, what's going on, why is it hurting, that kind of stuff, and see if there's some things that you might be doing wrong with form, or, maybe something's just really stiff and they need to mobilize it. There's trigger points maybe in the muscles that are causing pain. A lot of different things can be going on that creates pain. So first you got to put that fire out if it's not going out on its own. So that's super normal, and it ideally shouldn't be too difficult of a plan of care, because I know sometimes PT can be a little bit expensive for people. It's high copays, co-insurances, things like that, and it can be um, a little bit not feasible. So even if you just do a couple of sessions and get some really good advice, so that's where you'd have to, do some research and make sure that you're going to a clinic that will give you good advice. So word of mouth, Google reviews, things like that would be a good way. Ask your doctor, do they recommend somebody specifically? That can always be kind of helpful as well, because it's not a one size fits all. Just like not all lawyers are equal, not all accountants are equal, not all primary care physicians are equal. There are people that are going to be a little bit better about how they're spending your time and money, and there's going to be people that might waste them, and that happens all the time in every field. So just know that, do a little bit of research before you just, pop in somewhere. So that's always my advice to anybody that's out of town. We're in Jacksonville Beach, but anybody that's not here, just word of mouth is huge. Sometimes your primary care can be pretty well plugged in as well. So they're typically a good outlet. So now, big picture is when you restore access to your hip, then you're going to restore access to your entire body. You got better access for posture, better access for how you use your legs. So this is a super important central part. So share this with anybody that you might think would be benefit them, and stay tuned for next week. Like, subscribe, all the different things that help this channel grow and keep this information going out there.